Thank you very much, Sean. Thanks, Joe, for the invitation. Spent 4.5 hours on the hottest day in Ireland travelling up to Donegal. Thanks very much, Joe. Really appreciate that. I did pray for you on occasion every town I passed, Cavan, Irvinstown, Enniskillen. And then when I found out Glenties was another hour away, I really despaired altogether. But thank you very much for the invitation anyway. But what can you say about Brexit that hasn't been said already and ponderously said in many places? My own view largely is that it would never happen in Ireland, and if it did, we'd continually vote to change it. So maybe the British need to learn some salutary lessons on our understanding of democracy, as we've experienced with the previous treaties of the European Union. On a more serious note, of course, we're only a decade and a half into the 21st century, and already we've had a series of economic shocks. We have the most insidious wars going on in the Middle East and other parts of Africa. We have the greatest mass migration in population since the Second War on our borders, within and coming into Europe. So we haven't started off very well in this 21st century. And I think that epitomises probably the shape of things to come in the immediate future as well. Of course, Brexit, it's trying to assess what real impact it will have on Ireland and on the European Union, and wider than that, on the world economy, on markets and on the fiscal markets. And I leave that to greater economic minds than I. I admire Paul Krugman in a lot of ways, unfortunate terminology, however. What worries me largely is that we've done an extremely difficult 8-9 years of heavy lifting, and we're no sooner on a reasonable road of recovery than suddenly we're hit with this shock and this tremor that's likely to continue for some time. I hope it doesn't set us back from the uphill struggle we've been undertaking for the last number of years as a people and as a population, workers, senior citizens, government, everybody who has been affected by this. And I think the issue of Brexit is more particular for us in the sense that it hits both the north and the south of this country and will have ongoing effects for us. What has worried me, though, over the last number of years, particularly since the economic shock and the upset to the world economy 2008-2009, how much the European Union itself has drifted politically. Certainly, I've seen over the last number of years a significant shift in the attitudes within the European Union, both within member countries and between member countries. And I must say I was somewhat upset recently that the immediate reaction to Brexit was the original 6 foreign ministers met, and then we had 3 major European leaders, Renzi of Italy, Holland of France and Merkel meeting. Suddenly I said, well, what European Union are we in if we are going back into these small clubs of the elite or certain decision makers? But also the thought struck me that probably the 3 leaders that met may not be in power within the next 18 to 24 months, that in fact they could be replaced by other political leaders, particularly perhaps potentially of the right, rather than of the centre or of the left, and what implications that may have for us. I've also noticed that over the last number of years, in various work I've been involved with the International Labour Organization and the European Union, that there's been a fair degree of assault in terms of the working conditions of people, those agreements that were built up, hard won, hard fought, hard achieved, hard gained over the previous 20 years, that marked the European Union and the social chapter of the European Union. Very few people talk about the social chapter anymore and the rights of workers and the rights of citizens contained within it. And of course, my concern largely, and I'll come to it later, is that the opt-out option for Britain that is now absolute will have a major impact on our trading relation and our competitive situation with the European Union. Also, I think in these periods of crisis, we are bereft of real leadership, real stand-up leadership that we need in Europe. There are no Coles, there are no Brandts, there is no Mitterrand, there's no Delors. And I think that has to be of concern to us in a sense that there's no grand vision emerging. There's no unified purpose. It's almost reaction to the latest crisis and then the latest crisis again. We have more meetings of presidents of the European Union or prime ministers of the European Union than we have actually of probably meetings of our own parliament in recent times. It's almost we lurch from the latest crisis to the next crisis without fundamentally laying down parameters by which they can be resolved. And of course, the continuing bolstering of the euro and the quantitative easing adopted in regard to the euro, that will come back to bite at some time. You can't release that amount of paper money in the economy without somebody at some stage wondering about its value and its worth. And then I think in the European Union, and Brexit is part of it and probably one of the clearest examples of it, of how you find in Europe now the ideological voices of the extreme, of the ultra-left on the one hand and the extreme on the other, gaining momentum within Europe with no compromise, no understanding, no common arrangement, and forces of both the ultra-left and ultra-right actually getting to situations where they actually control governments within Europe in countries we would never have thought of or experienced before. And of course, we have now the possibility of that happening in Austria and with Marine Le Pen after the appalling events of the last year in France. And of course, it's happening in the old East Germany of Germany as well. It's happening in Finland. It's happening in the Netherlands. It is emerging, I feel. One doesn't want to equate it to the downfall of the Weimar Republic and the extremes that gave rise to Nazi Germany. But certainly the voices are there, and indeed, in some cases, the emblems are still there as well. And coming to the wider possible view, how does this affect Ireland and how Ireland will feature and fare in this changing and constantly emerging environment, political and economic? We're effectively still, and with all due respect to our neighbours in Malta and in Cyprus, the real island nation of the European Union. In the sense now we're going to be the farthest west with the next island that people euphemistically used to call the mainland, now deciding to cut itself off from Europe and relive that famous adage, fog in the channel, continent cut off. So we are in a situation probably undreamt of, since nobody really envisaged that any member state, despite Article 50, would ever secede from the European Union. Certainly I never believed it, and I thought the referendum would be carried narrowly, but I certainly went to bed that night happy in my mind that Britain remained in the euro, to wake up the next morning to find actually they had decided the opposite. So I think that has come as a shock to us all. I still think we're living with the ultimate nature of that shock that will be worked out potentially over the next 6, 12, 2 years, as soon as Article 50 is invoked and all that means. From our own perspective, I think thankfully we're in a better situation nationally, insofar as I consider to a large degree, as I said earlier, the heavy lifting having been done on quite a number of the economic and social issues that needed to be addressed to address and rebalance what was happening in the economy. And I think, Minister, we're on a daily diet of ministerial and government announcements around issues that the electorate themselves brought to the attention of our elected politicians in no uncertain terms in the last election, that they wished to be addressed specifically around their communities and around their environment and the matters that were affecting them on a day-and daily basis. The three public service agreements are, as best as we can do, embedded in the system and has delivered substantive reform, change and correction to the public finances at great cost to public servants. And thankfully, under the Lansdowne Road Agreement, there is an element of restoration in that. Not everybody's happy with that, but we don't live in the perfect world. Sometimes I believe it's, as Lyndon Johnson so crudely and ruefully put it, and I won't complete it, it's better to be in the tent than outside of it. But look, that's a bit of time to go on that as well, and I don't want to get into too many controversies in regard to that. I've had enough of those in my working life. But I do feel that insufficient cognizance, insufficient recognition has been given to workers, both in the public and private sector, and to the unions that represent them, for the great sense of national endeavour they made during that period. It was similar to the 1987-1990 times when we did establish the initial social partnership agreements. And I think we have to be cautious sometimes that we have to ensure that democratic bodies within the state, be they trade unions, be they community associations, non-governmental bodies, are encouraged. Because if that element of democracy fails us, we're only left then with street protest. Our industrial relations is significantly embedded, as I said, in well-respected laws. Unions and employers, by and large, respect the laws, employment laws, and the industrial action laws of this country. We occasionally have the odd aberration, as the Minister and I lived through for about 3 or 4 months, the Lewis dispute, but I said I wouldn't mention that for 6 months after my retirement. But if you juxtapose that against what is happening in Germany, Spain, and Portugal, and France, in the United Kingdom, all over the last 2 years have been brought to a halt, either by national protest strike action, by individual actions among public servants, be they health workers, the junior hospital doctors dispute in the United Kingdom, rail workers. Lufthansa went on strike in Germany 15 times in the last 2 years, while we were still crying a little bit about Lewis and other things. So just to put that in perspective about how lucky we are in Ireland that we have an established system by which we can resolve disputes amicably, peacefully, and largely by honour, rather than utilising the law itself. So I just want to make those issues in the context of industrial relations in the public service. I know the Minister is about to announce, I don't know whether you're announcing it tonight or tomorrow, Minister, the establishment of Public Pay Commission. I'm looking forward to what the terms of reference that being, and if I can help you at all in any way devising them, I will. But haven't been through, my back still bears the scars of the last 8 or 9 years of engagement in that area. But there are a number, I think, primary challenges in the public service that relate to pay and reform. One of them is to establish what the pay norms should be and how they would be negotiated in a future structure. We can't throw out what we've achieved by bringing all the unions together and working together with the trade unions in the public sector. The myriad of grading, salary, allowances, entry rates, etc. We're going to have to address all of these by how we're going to see the way forward. And also we're going to have to see how is there a European dimension to this? Do we need to benchmark against other economies, and what the validity of that benchmarking, either internally within our own country or externally? So over to you, Minister. These are your challenges ahead of you, but maybe I'd point out a few of those. But also just juxtapose that as I said, against what I say is happening in Europe. We get this impression that everything is hunky-dory in the other country. I happen to have the privilege of going to France for some of the soccer. I think on every day I was there was a strike, so much so that one of the days I was walking up the street of Bordeaux, and these few Irish guys had a few pints and they shouted out, "Mulvey, would you ever sort out the strike so we could get home?" So I had to tell them I was caught in the same one myself and I was doing my best. So, and then, of course, there's the perennial air traffic controllers strike. If the Belgians don't go on strike on Monday, the French do. And if the French go on Tuesday, the Spanish will join on Wednesday and Thursday. So it's the only time I have a certain amount of sympathy with Ryanair. Otherwise, my sympathy is short-lived after that. But certainly, what the point I want to make is that effectively in Ireland, we should be thankful for Saul mercies for what we have in that context. If I may go on, though, to the private sector, because I think one of the major impacts will be upon the private sector of Brexit. Britain have always been reluctant adherers, and I've been involved in negotiations in Europe in the 1970s and in the 80s around European directives and the social chapter. Britain was always reluctant to agree to any form of European Employment Rights Directive or unemployment related directive, or the establishment of any European agency that might have oversight of that, including the European courts. And where possible, they always sought the opt-out option when we didn't. So in that respect, I think our private sector employers are going to face an extraordinary competitive challenge, not just on the investment side, but actually on the operational goods, manufacturing, transport, and transition of goods through the United Kingdom to the mainland of Europe now. And that is because Britain may not feel obliged to adhere to the European directives relating to the workplace. And some of these are very, very important directives that have been transposed into European law and have the force of European law. They're around pensions, collective redundancies, transfer of undertakings when companies close down or transferred ownership. Obviously, other areas including discrimination in pay, which they may be obliged anyway under a Universal Charter, but agency workers, the Information and Consultation Directive, the Working Time Directive, posted workers, and a myriad of other directives, including the very clear one that there's going to be crucifixion over, and that's the free movement of workers. But if Britain opts out of these completely and changes their own laws in regard to this, Irish industry in all its facets and in all its walks of life and in all its sectors is going to face a very, very tough, competitive and unequal challenge vis-à-vis the United Kingdom. And that's where we see the potential probably of Britain opting out of Europe being potentially an investment opportunity for us. It can carry the opposite health warning that it may not, that companies might see Britain as a good place to locate when they don't have to adhere to all these European directives that will apply regarding employment rights and equity in the workplace. So it's a marker I would put down. That world may not entirely be rosy, and the IDA need to be aware of that situation. Of course, then, they will not be bound by the European Court, or indeed, perhaps in some respects, as they are now proposing to revisit the Human Rights Act in the United Kingdom, by the European Court of Human Rights either. I am very clearly convinced, in seeing and reading what I read, that Theresa May is one cool customer. I won't repeat what another former minister said about her, but I think she is going to out-Thatcher in a lot of respects, vis-à-vis the idea that she and her cabinet, and very cleverly picked cabinet, of making Britain great again. I think they're going to be a solid cabinet. I think they're going to be a very effective cabinet around that idea of making Brexit work, because they cannot afford the opposite. And all their energy, all their intelligence, and they are very intelligent, and all their efforts are going to go around this and do this, because now they will not be restricted in their trade agreements with Australia, New Zealand, India, Pakistan, or wherever. It's like the recreation of the Empire of the Commonwealth in trade terms. So in that sense, I would be worried by an emergent, determined, and very, very clearly focused British administration that will not be worried about invoking Article 50 and the implications of it. Perhaps when we drill down, some of this will not work well with the British population, either in Britain itself or British nationals abroad. But I think in this respect, Britain itself are not going to take any risks that they made the wrong decision or their people made the wrong decision. They will single-mindedly go about this project and this objective. And I think we need to be careful, very careful. I'm glad the Taoiseach Minister has recently decided on a task force, because this is the greatest challenge we have ever faced since the decision of Ireland to enter the European Union in 1973. And as we clearly see, and I've clearly probably illustrated earlier, we're not talking to a united Europe of European leaders who are fixed on one purpose and one intent. In fact, I think they're probably fixed on one intent, that they're not going to coddle to the British in regard to this. They're going to be as fiercely determined themselves in regard to the exit strategy as well in Article 50. And we've already seen earlier indications of that immediately after it and continuing. But we're not going to be able, we're not getting much synergy or much of a hearing yet around the fact we share a land border with the United Kingdom. When Romania, Croatia, Germany, Poland have a real land border with everybody else in the Balkan and Middle Europe, apart from those who are seeking to enter the European Union. They're not going to worry that much about a land border in the of our border between ourselves and Northern Ireland, when they're going to be worried about issues around Catalonian independence or the Basques or the battle between Northern Italy and Southern Italy, issues around Gibraltar, or the perennial linguistic issues in Belgium that left them without a government for almost a year. Mind you, they continued on, Minister Seemingly, but then they did have a royal family. So the point I'm illustrating here perhaps is that there is other issues going on in Europe that have a bigger focus for some European leaders and certain prime ministers than our particular focus on what the effect of Brexit might be. So largely, I'm conscious of time, I don't want to be a Job's comfort in regard to this, but certainly this is serious business. It has major implications for us. It has major implications for the public finances of this country. It has major implications for how we'll do our business in the future and how we will attract that investment to our country. And what other issues are playing out in Europe during all of this, certainly against the background, as I say, of a very, very determined British government to make Brexit work and work successfully on behalf of the only people they're concerned about, their own population. As for the other issues in the United Kingdom around the constitutional position of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, I already see certain groups in the United Kingdom, cross-party groups, suggesting some kind of independent jurisdiction or arrangement for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Somehow they will leave Wales out of all of this, but that's probably because we have a Prince of Wales rather than a Prince of Northern Ireland or Scotland. But I do see they having their own internal constitutional issues that might distract them for some time, but we can't wait. We have to be about this business now, and we have to be about this business because the future, economically and socially, of our country will depend upon it. And we're not necessarily going to have great allies around this issue, given the other issues convulsing Europe. It's one thing to be the poster boy of the euro when it was launched, or to be the poster boy of the recovery. But it's extraordinary. Europe has long political memories, but they have very short economic memories. So that's all I have to say this evening, and hope it didn't put you off a drink later, but that's the way it is, folks. Thank you.